The midday sun was merciless, hanging over the high desert like an unblinking eye. The sand shimmered in waves, and the few junipers that dotted the valley stood still as sentinels under the breathless heat. To the east, along a wagon road that had seen more violence than mercy, a small band of men had halted. They were settlers, roughened by the trail and soured by the months of dust and deprivation. Their horses stomped restlessly, picking at the stunted grass. Two of the men argued beside a wagon. Near their boots knelt a bound woman, her wrists rubbed raw, her dark hair tangled and heavy with dust. Her dress, little more than a ragged calico shift ripped at the shoulder, had once belonged to someone else. Her eyes, however, belonged only to her people. They held a clarity that refused both pity and fear. That steadiness unsettled the men, though they would never have admitted it aloud. "Best to be done with her," said one, a scarred freighter named Will Dancer. "We can't keep dragging this squaw along. She's Apache. Same kind killed Russ back at the crossing." The taller man, Clay Henson, spat in the sand and looked at her with something tangled in his chest. Fear, anger, maybe a strange form of guilt. "Russ wouldn't have wanted her left alive," Will pressed. "We string a rope, hitch it to the mule. Quick end. No bullet wasted." Clay's hand hovered near his belt knife. He didn't meet the woman's gaze. The others stood back, silent, watching as if cruelty were just another chore. Only the wind protested, sweeping up the smell of iron and sweat and turning it into a whisper that vanished among the mesquite. The woman's name was Tesha. Daughter of the Chiricahua, born where the high mesas cut the wind into singing spirals. 3 weeks ago she had been captured when the cavalry raided her camp near the Gila. Most of her band had been driven south or scattered into the mountains. She had fought, not with bravado but with the measured precision of one who expected to die. That she was still alive was neither luck nor mercy. The soldiers had traded her to these settlers, a crude transaction meant to curry favor or rid themselves of trouble. Tesha watched Will loop the rope through the harness ring of a mule. She could taste the metal in the air, hot and bitter. Death was not unfamiliar to her people. It rode beside them all their lives. But shame at dying like an animal behind a wagon, was a weight heavier than chains. Her grandfather had once said, "If they take your hands, fight with your eyes. If they take your eyes, fight with your spirit." She breathed through her nose, slow, deliberate, summoning that spirit. "Hold up." Clay's voice cracked the quiet. "She's no use to us dead out here. We can turn her in at Fort Lowell. Get something for her." Will's face hardened. "You think them bluecoats paying bounties now? I think they'll pay to look decent in front of their officer wives," Clay said. "A live Apache woman looks better in a cage than a corpse on some trail. Might buy us a supply chit." For a moment no one answered. The mule pawed at the soil, sensing the strange weight of human decision. Tesha looked from one face to the other. Sometimes, she knew, men argued not because of the subject but to prove who among them still commanded something within their broken world. Finally, Will cursed and dropped the rope. "Fine. But if we run short on water, she goes first." They left her tied behind the wagon on a lead rope, alive, but barely. The dust swallowed her footprints, but her heart kept time with each jolt of the wheels. That night, camped near a dry arroyo, the men drank from their canteens and muttered around the fire. Tesha was tied to a wagon wheel, her back straight. Above her, the stars broke open like silver. Dust scattered across black hide. She remembered the words her mother used to sing while grinding mesquite pods, songs of the mountain spirits and their watchful strength. Tesha hummed them quietly, the sound barely audible over the creak of leather and the hiss of the flames. The rhythm reminded her of home and of the stories the old ones told, that when a person's spirit remained steadfast, even the desert would rise to hide them from harm. Perhaps that was what happened the next morning. When dawn came thick with dust, one of the men discovered the traces of horsemen on the ridge. There was panic, arguing, shouting. In the confusion, they forgot about Tesha until the sound of distant gunfire cracked the sky. Will and Clay scrambled for rifles, firing blindly into the rocks. The returning shots came swift and sure. A horse screamed. A man went down. Tesha saw opportunity flicker like lightning. A loose strap lay near the fire from the half-packed saddle. She wriggled toward it, working the edge of her bindings against the buckle until the coarse hemp bit deeper into her wrists, then snapped. Pain burst bright but brief. She was free. A young Apache scout crested the ridge, face painted in streaks of white clay. Recognizing her kin, Tesha reached for the dropped revolver in the sand. She fired once, not to kill, but to scatter the mule team. The animals bolted, dragging the wagon sideways, throwing Will beneath the rim. The wagon toppled, a loud sledge of chaos and dust. By the time Clay pulled himself from beneath the canvas, Tesha was running toward the rocks. The fight was short. The remaining settlers fled, dropping supplies behind them. 2 Apache riders circled Tesha, astonished to see her alive. One of them, a boy hardly 16, called her sister and helped her onto his horse. Behind them, Will's shouting faded into silence. For 3 days they rode through broken canyons toward a hidden camp in the high country. There, among cottonwoods and the clean music of a cold stream, Tesha let her muscles unclench. Elders came to hear her story. Women brought water and cornmeal. Yet even in safety, she could not rest. Something gnawed within her. The image of Clay Henson's eyes when he hesitated with the knife, neither sparing nor condemning her. Mercy wrapped in confusion was its own kind of wound. When the moon grew fat, Tesha asked for a horse and left the camp alone. She followed the trail back toward the wagon road. The air had cooled, the smell of rain heavy on the wind. Near an abandoned corral she found the proof of what she sought, tracks of men and mules moving south. Among them, a boot print she recognized. Clay was alive. That knowledge did not bring vengeance to her mouth. Rather, it pressed questions she had no language for. She followed until she found him 2 evenings later, limping across a gully with one remaining pack mule. He saw her before she spoke, hand twitching toward his revolver. She simply sat her horse, silent. "You should have left me to die," he said hoarsely. She dismounted slowly, her braid brushing her shoulder. "You tried that with me," she answered in English that bore the soft accent of mountain wind. "It didn't work." Clay lowered his weapon. "We were scared," he said. "Didn't matter of right or wrong out there." Tesha looked past him, at the cruel expanse of desert glowing in dusk. "Fear is a hungry wolf," she said. "Feed it once, and it follows forever." He seemed to shrink beneath her words. Exhaustion or shame? Perhaps both. Dragged at his shoulders. She noticed then that his left boot was split, his ankle bound with a torn shirt. He hadn't eaten properly in days. Behind the gruffness lay a man unraveling under his own guilt. She reached into her saddlebag and tossed him a strip of dried meat. He stared, dumbfounded. Why? He asked. You give life. You take life, she answered. Now we are the same. Then she turned her horse. He called after her, voice breaking over the wind. Where will you go? Home, she said without turning. Where you cannot follow. She rode north until the hills swallowed her again, leaving him standing beside the empty road. Months passed. Tesha's band moved often. The army pressed tighter. Her people fled first to the Sierra Madre, then to smaller hiding places, chasing freedom that felt like the echo of an old song. But Tesha's reputation spread, a woman who had escaped captivity and spared one of her captors. Some called it foolish compassion, others called it medicine for both spirits. Winter brought news. A civilian trader at Fort Lowell had taken to preaching against continued war. He was no missionary, but he spoke with unusual conviction, telling anyone who would listen that understanding, not vengeance, would end the bloodshed. His name, the soldiers said, was Clay Henson. Tesha felt a strange current move through her. Perhaps guilt could plant seeds even in dry ground. The seasons changed again. One evening, while gathering mesquite pods, Tesha met an old mescalero messenger who carried word from the fort. An Apache woman's kin had been granted safe passage to retrieve remains of those killed months ago along the wagon road. The officer in charge had made the offer through Henson. Tesha considered it long that night as coyotes yipped across the foothills. The offer could be a trick, but it could also be the final chance to reclaim what was lost. When she arrived at Fort Lowell under a flag of truce, she rode alongside 3 elders. Soldiers watched warily, hands on triggers. Henson emerged from the barracks, leaner, pale against the glare. He carried himself differently now. No swagger, only an earnest fatigue. He greeted Tesha with a nod. Didn't think you'd come. I came for what belongs to my people, she said. And for truth. They walked together to the wagon road where bleached bones rested half buried in dust. She knelt and gathered them gently, humming the same song she had sung beside a wagon wheel on the night she thought she would die. The soldiers looked on, uncertain whether to feel reverence or shame. Later, beneath the shade of a mesquite tree, Henson spoke quietly. When I told the colonel about you, he said no woman like that would have spared me. I told him he doesn't know anything about strength. Tesha fixed him with those steady eyes that once unnerved him. You tell him truth is not weakness, she said. Sometimes mercy is the only weapon left. They parted with no promises. Yet, as Tesha rode back into the horizon, she carried within her something like forgiveness. Not soft, not easy, but forged by endurance. The memory of the rope, the mule, and the unyielding sun no longer clenched her heart. It had become story, as all pain eventually must. Years later, when the wars all ended in treaties and relocations, a few settlers remembered a tale told around fires by aging cowhands. It was about an Apache woman who survived being dragged to her death and rode off alive. Some said she became a spirit guide, appearing on stormy nights to travelers who lost their way. Others swore she was flesh and blood, living quietly among mountain tribes, raising children who carried her fierce, steady eyes. Clay Henson lived to grayness. In the end, local people said he spent many evenings outside his small trading post, staring west as if expecting someone to ride out of the light. He kept a carved wooden figure on the shelf behind him, an Apache woman standing upright, wind lifting her hair. When asked who had made it, he'd only smile. A lesson, He'd say, carved out of mercy. But Tesha's descendants told a different version. They said she returned to the high mesas and taught her children that strength is not the hardest stone but the deepest water. It yields, flows, and shapes the canyon itself. They said that when her time came, she went alone into the mountains and left behind her footprints like stars in the dust, vanishing where earth touches sky. The old people still utter her name in stories to teach courage. Tesha, the woman who would not bow. And when the desert sun burns mercilessly over the land, they tell the children that even under the worst of light, a person can stand straight, unbroken, filled with their own dawn.